Chapter 16. My eyes opened briefly from time to time, but it was impossible to bring anything into focus. Dreams occupied my semi-conscious mind for long stretches of time. Mother and father were there. Micah, Abigail, Reverend Washburn, Amos Perkins, Lone Wolf, Claude, and Jean-Luc all made appearances. Events from my past were relived in these dreams, and at times people made appearances in settings where they had never existed. One dream came to me many times. Abigail sat at a small table in an unfamiliar log cabin. I entered happy to see her smile and smelled the freshly baked bread. Her face glowed with feelings of pride. She held a newborn baby up to me and she whispered, "There's your papa." Her skin appeared illuminated, and a golden hue surrounded her, making her appear to be angelic. She then stood and glided across the earthen floor. She slides her small, soft hand inside of my rough and calloused one, and we seemingly floated out the door and across the small clearing in front of the home. We continued floating over the field full of crops, and eventually came to a stop in the forest beyond. Music filled my ears, and I recognized the place in the hills from my first trip south with Jean-Luc and Claude. Abigail stares lovingly into my eyes as her beauty and the look of joy in her face instill in me a feeling of internal peace. Her lips part and she speaks her words softly. "Keep going, Silas," she pleads. After several days drifting in and out of consciousness, I regained my senses and found I was inside of a small church. Two other men also lay on blankets in a corner of the room near me. Benches fill the center of the room, and a raised platform with a wooden stand serves as a pulpit. A statue of Jesus crucified on the cross hangs on the wall behind the wooden stand. One of the men is the fellow captive I helped carry the last 2 days of the journey to this location. He is smiling at me. "We were beginning to worry you wouldn't come around. According to Henry, our other traveling companion, you saved my life," he says. "My name is John Quick. We are now captives of a Spanish garrison that is rebuilding a mission called San Luis. The Spanish have been rewarding Indians well for English captives. Apparently some Englishmen have been responsible for Indian slave raids that have brought trouble for the Spanish in these parts," he explained quietly. Two priests were now staring at us from across the room. "I'm sorry to throw this all upon you in your current state, but moments for us to speak undisturbed have been infrequent. We have been brought here as slave laborers to help build the new mission. There are currently at least 7 other Englishmen here besides us." One of the priests approached with a bowl of venison stew. He spoke to us in Spanish and then fed me with care. I was so famished the meal tasted like one of the best of my life. John Quick and the other injured man went to work the next day. I was alone in the church for 2 more days before going to work with the others. We built buildings, walls, trenches, and cleared fields during the day. We weren't overworked. The priests would not allow it. In the evenings, we were put into a small storage shed after the evening meal. The crowded shed had 2 levels of wooden shelves built onto each side wall that served as beds. There were enough shackles and spaces to hold 10 prisoners. Each man had one wrist placed into a shackle that was attached to a chain anchored into the floorboards or ceiling. This allowed access to a small space occupied by the wooden platforms and a blanket. A guard was posted at each end of the structure at all times. This would be our life for the next 2 years. Once healthy, I went about the work with pride and maximum effort. After considering the position of the Spanish guards, it seemed best to accept that they were just doing their job. It was made easier by the fact that almost all guards treated us well if we cooperated. Fortunately, this approach led me to good relations with many of the Spanish soldiers. Having already been taught the French language, learning to speak Spanish came easily. The most difficult part of those 2 years for me wasn't the labor or the Spanish guards. Unfortunately, this was not the case for many fellow prisoners. Many had left behind wives and children. They were unsure of the fate that had befallen their loved ones. They couldn't accept the position we were in. Despite my best efforts to encourage their patience, some broke down both physically and mentally, and a few even attempted escape. They were my daily companions, and inevitably we developed close bonds. It was easy to care about them, but necessary for me to keep them at a distance emotionally. Henry Wheaton, who had carried John Quick into the mission settlement with me, died 6 months after we arrived in an escape attempt. He was shot through the eye by a guard, and his body was left in front of our sleeping shed for 2 days as a warning. Some unknown predator dragged his corpse away the second night. John Quick died of illness after a 1.5 years. It was not uncommon for several prisoners to become sick. New prisoners arrived from time to time at the settlement over the 2 years. We never had more than 14 in the settlement, and never fewer than 7. Despite my young age, both fellow prisoners and the Spanish guards came to view me as the leader of the prisoners. This respect was likely granted due to a combination of my survival skills, cooperative attitude, and ability to converse in English, French, Native American tongues, and Spanish. My understanding of Spanish and local Indian languages grew steadily. The dialect spoken by local tribes was different, but some words were similar, making it easy to begin picking up the meanings of other words. When the Spanish guards were becoming concerned about the behavior or mental state of a fellow prisoner, they would call on me to help solve their problem. By counseling the prisoner in question, or issuing a stern warning, the arrangement was mostly successful. However, even the guards seemed to understand that some men could only be patient for so long before they had to take their chance at an escape to get back to those they had been taken away from. When patience ran out and these decisions were made, I provided as much knowledge as possible to help the man with his attempt. The best friend I made during this time was a Virginian named Daniel Wood. He was almost the same age as me. He had not yet taken a wife and had been taken prisoner shortly after moving from his father's land to begin creating his homestead in Western Virginia. His father had come to Virginia as an indenture. He had served his time in labor and eventually earned his freedom and land. Daniel was eager to learn. I spent free moments teaching him the skills acquired in my travels. He shared stories of his upbringing in the Virginia Territory. I was intensely curious about life in these settlements as compared to Roxbury. His stories and parts of stories from other Virginia prisoners began to bring on a feeling of concern. They spoke of a world that seemed full of sickness and death. They seemed to accept this as normal circumstance. Virginia seemed to be a place where ambitious young men fought for possession of land, status, and even women due to the disproportionate number of men and women. My curiosity about this place from earlier years began to fade. Daniel and the other prisoners were constantly asking me to repeat the stories of my previous adventures. Their admiration and interest brought on a sense of pride for the life I had lived the previous 3 years. Daniel became a true friend, but despite his loyalty, something deep inside warned me to keep him at a distance. While repairing the exterior wall on the east side of the mission settlement, just out of hearing from the guards assigned to us, he cautiously brought up a subject that had apparently been on his mind for a long time. "Silas, we have been here together as prisoners since my arrival close to a year ago. Not once have you brought up escape from this place. Every other captive here has talked to me of escape. All agreed that you would have the best chance of success." "Why do none speak to me of this?" I inquired. The men here respect you," he continued carefully, "but they are afraid because of your close relationship and many conversations with the guards. They don't understand you." I thought on this for a moment before continuing. "To me, Daniel, this is but another adventure to survive. These are hostile lands for us. Escape is unlikely, and we are not treated horribly. The guards are men who have a job to do. Cooperation with them has served us all well as the rules and our freedoms around the mission over the months have become more relaxed. I have always considered escape, and perhaps someday the opportunity will come when success is in my favor." "The men will be happy to hear of this," he interrupted. "Perhaps, Daniel, it would be best if we kept this between us. Trust with the guards could never be restored if it were lost. If the time is ever right for escape, I will know." "Just promise me that if that time ever comes, you will take me with you," he said with an air of desperation in his voice. "I will do everything in my power to make it so, friend." I nodded to affirm my commitment, though already aware this was not a promise I could guarantee.